I'm here today with my friend and author, Matt Tenney. Matt's written a great new book called Serve to be Great, and I want to introduce him by way of the subtitle of this book, which is Leadership Lessons from a Prison, a Monastery, and a Boardroom. This is a very powerful story for you. It gripped me right from the beginning in this leadership, service, redemption story that you went through. And so I'm thrilled to have a chance to introduce you to the audience and talk about what you went through. Started off with not so great of a story and landing in prison. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the journey started off with hands down my greatest failure in life. And that was just making a very, very poor decision to be dishonest, to take a shortcut. And I attempted a fraud against the U.S. government. This was back in January of 2001 when I arranged this delivery while I was actually on active duty with the Marine Corps, as an officer in the Marine Corps. And I had learned about this opportunity, essentially, of if I were to send a couple documents to a couple places, I could arrange the unauthorized delivery of a pretty large sum of money and ask them to deliver it wherever I wanted to. And at the time, I was very focused on money. I was very focused on the short term, and because of this, I think I did a lot of rationalizing. I told myself things like, it'd be a victimless crime. This is U.S. government money. They waste all this money every year. So I kept feeding my mind with this garbage until I convinced myself that I could at least find out if it's possible to arrange the delivery, which I did. Once I had the delivery arranged, it was almost $3 million on paper, and that just hit me in the face, and I said, there's no way I can try to take this money. I didn't even have a plan for picking it up, but it was too late. At that point, I had already broken the law, and so I was arrested and ended up spending 5.5 years confined to a military prison as a result of being stupid and being dishonest.
So you had a lot of time to reflect, and I'm curious about that self-talk, because in your book you're telling yourself these things, kind of justifying it with these various things, and yet now, fast forward, your self-talk has changed. For leaders today, how important is self-talk, and how do you grab that microphone inside to give yourself the positive self-talk and directing yourself the right way so you don't end up down that path and actually doing what you did?
That's a great question. Yeah, so what really changed things for me was I just learned about a simple practice called mindfulness training, which is a very simple way of just training attention, training awareness to where we increase the clarity of what's going on in our inner world. I have a friend named Meng at Google who wrote a great book, and he talks about it's like increasing the resolution of our inner world. Taking it from a 50 DPI picture to a 500 DPI picture, and this is something that's trainable. So, for me, it was awesome because about 6 months after I started practicing mindfulness, I was actually happier in the brig with nothing than I'd ever been in my life, which is kind of what precipitated my transition. I wanted to do that full time, and I thought about being a monk for the rest of my life. But the core practice that kind of made that shift was this very simple effort of bringing our attention back to what's happening now, in addition to the thoughts that are going through our head. And what happens when we continue to do that is we increase this inner clarity of what's going on in our world. And once that clarity is increased, then it's almost as though there's a little bit of space created. Like if this is our awareness and these are our thoughts and emotions, we create some space. And once we have space, we tend to see our thinking much more objectively. And I think we could probably all agree that we all have crazy thoughts all the time, right? And that self-talk can be, in my case, I followed it and it led to a disaster, right? I'm sure there's CEOs who have had self-talk that have led to very poor decisions. So the idea is we don't have any control over that directly. I know there's a lot of people out there that just say, oh, think positive, think positive. What I've noticed is that if you're just 100% honest with what's actually going through your mind, and you just recognize it non-judgmentally, what starts to happen is the mind starts to shift on its own. The self-talk becomes more positive, it becomes more honest, more authentic.
So tell me about that journey from being in prison to grabbing control of that through this practice and being authentic and in the moment. How is that important to leaders today? How much of a difference have you seen that? It's obviously made a difference for you, and you've been teaching this and talking about it to others. Have you seen other people kind of grab that idea? Have you seen changes in their lives as well?
Oh, definitely. The things that I talk about are definitely not new. I think there's people that have been practicing the things that I talk about for a long time. And there are leaders who have started to make this transition. The practice of mindfulness, in fact, is now being taught at numerous companies.
Everywhere, it seems, right?
Yeah, especially on the West Coast. I mean, you go to Silicon Valley, there isn't a company there that's not training their people in mindfulness. General Mills, in fact, which to my knowledge probably invests more in leadership training than any other company out there, they've been training their executives in mindfulness for about a decade, maybe even a little bit longer. And the results that they've seen have been tremendous, which is why they invest so much money in it. They find that people make decisions better. They develop emotional intelligence so that they relate and serve the people on their teams better. So the benefits that people are seeing are pretty tremendous.
Well, that's one practice that's obviously changed the course of your career, but one of the things you talk about is that you found this practice that changed your life.
Right.
And, big drum roll, what is it? And it's serving others, service. So you go from this mindset of selfishness, I'm going to try to steal this money, to a completely different mindset of how do I give back to the world. And that doesn't usually happen. The same person doesn't usually do that and do that so quickly. What are you up to? How are you trying to serve the world?
Well, with regards to nobody, not people always doing that, I don't think there's anything special about me. The things that I did are replicable, they're highly trainable, and I honestly feel it was just the right conditions were there at the right time. The only one thing that I might have done different was when I had all these opportunities made available to me, I took action. That was basically the only difference. And what really helped me was, I started learning about this practice of mindfulness, and the people I was learning from were monks. And so once I realized that I was happier in the brig than I'd ever been in my life, I said, well, I want to go all the way. I want to live exactly as a monk would. And the core of monastic training is very simple. It's everything that you do is about what you can do to be of greatest service to others. It's becoming the most kind and compassionate human being you can become, to help other people be free from suffering. And this absolutely just transformed my experience in prison. Most people there are they're waiting for their time to pass so they can get on to what's next. I was so enamored by this purpose that I had of, wow, I can actually affect the world by helping the people around me, that I actually woke up an hour early every day. We had to get up at 5 o'clock. I got up at 4 so I could spend an extra hour training to be of greater service to others. And the impact that it's had in my life has been phenomenal. So that's what led to me researching, well, what if serving not only the customer, but the employees and all of the staff, what if that is the #1 priority instead of quarterly profits? What does that do to an organization?
Changes everything. Well, it's interesting, you're in prison. Today when you're out, we have technology. I have 2 cell phones, an iPad, a laptop. We're wired like nowhere.
You're one connected guy.
Right, we're all connected, right? And we jump at what's going on with this, whether it's tweets or Facebook or email coming in, phone calls, all the priorities. And yet that seems to pull us away from all of these practices. So shutting it all down. And as leaders, as you think about future leaders, companies, whatever, you're not just talking to CEOs. You're talking to everybody. I like what you say. I believe it. Leadership is not a position. It's really who you are. Speak to that person who's overwired, and what would you say to that person who just needs to, what's your recommendation on how do you just shut it down?
Well, I would imagine that is probably just about all of us. I think.
I wouldn't say that.
I would imagine.
Speak to me.
I would imagine many people feel like, wow, I really spend a lot of time on devices. Now, of course, not everybody, but this is a pretty common issue. And I think there's a lot of value in this connection. For me, for instance, the transparency in which we have to behave as business leaders is tremendous, right? 50 years ago, you could be dumping toxins into the Ohio River and nobody knew about it and you could get away with it. Nowadays, somebody records it and posts it on YouTube, the whole world knows about it in 24 hours, you're fired. So you have to take the greater good into consideration as a leader if you want to be successful. But as with all tools, if we become attached to it and we become almost a victim of it, I think it can be pretty harmful. And some of the biggest ways we see that is, if I'm a manager, even if I only have 5 people on my team, but I'm so inundated with email that I never get out and actually have a conversation with people on my team and say, what's your life like? What are you working on in your life? How can I help you? What was your weekend like? Having conversations that are really about them and how we can help instead of just what work is about. So I think a couple tools that are pretty easy. is, one, I know a lot of people leave their Outlook open all the time or their email server, whatever they use for their email client on their computer. And I think a #1 step is shut that thing off. Block time. So, okay, if you have to check email 3 times a day, that's fine, but make it 30 minutes in the morning, maybe an hour over lunch, and 30 minutes in the evening, so that you have other time to do things that really matter. Because I mean, speaking from my own experience, I would imagine people can relate to this.
Pulled into the reactive instead
exactly.
of proactive.
If you start off with email, I know I could be in there 2 hours. Right. And then I look at my morning and I say, did I really accomplish that much? Instead, maybe say, well, what are the top 3 things that I want to get done today? Do that. And #1 of them should be reflecting on this idea of, well, what can I do to better serve the people on my team? This is one of the things that I think is really powerful, is just setting 10 minutes on the calendar, first thing, before you check email. What can I do to better serve the people on my team? And commit to taking action on the ideas that you come up with.
And they will come to you. Servant leadership at its best. Well, you can see why I wanted to talk to Matt, but I can't let Matt leave without asking him about your post on this blog about Daniel and the effect that he had, a teenager dying of cancer, and what it taught you about leadership. Tell us a little bit about Daniel and kind of that experience, and how did you find him, and what happened?
Sure. Well, I've been very fortunate to have been a part of co-founding and leading the Gainesville chapter of Kids Kicking Cancer. So this is a program where we work with young people like Daniel who are battling very serious illness like cancer or sickle cell anemia, and we teach them that they can actually lower their own pain levels, using their own inner power. And so I met Daniel through that program, and I think Daniel is a great example of, as you can imagine, I think big, right? I mean, my vision is of a worldwide culture of leaders who realize that serving their people should be their #1 priority. And so I tend to think big, but what I've learned as I've become a little bit older, I'm almost 40, so I'm getting up there, is that the little things are what really, really matter. And sometimes the little things can be incredibly inspiring, and they can drive loyalty and engagement in others. And Daniel's story is a perfect example of that. I mean, I've told his story probably 100 times in the last year. I included it in the book because I want his story to be heard by as many people as possible. And it's very simple. Here's a young man who has had a life that is almost unimaginable for most of us. He gets diagnosed with cancer when he's an early teen, goes through the hell of chemo and radiation, beats it. A couple of years later, he comes back, cancer's back, and he goes through hell again, thinking, okay, finally this time, I gotta have licked it this time, I can just live a normal life. Well, the time when I met him, when he came into the hospital, he was told by the doctors that the cancer was everywhere, and there was nothing that they could do to treat it. And he would probably only live a few more months. And I actually spoke to him just moments after he received that news. I actually watched the doctors come out of the room with tears in their eyes. And it was obvious that he had cried as well. But, he told me when I walked in the room, I didn't start crying until I saw my mother cry. Apparently what really hurts is not that we're going to lose our life, but knowing that other people around us that we love have to deal with it. But what really inspired me about Daniel was numerous things, but I think the moment that just blew me away was, I saw almost immediately, he's just one of the most kind, compassionate, most polite people I've ever met. And when this was 3 days after he received this news, I walked into his room and he's playing a video game. He had just eaten this whole pile of steak nachos, his favorite meal, and he's talking to me in between levels of the game. I didn't want to interrupt his game, so he plays a level, and then he talks with me for a couple minutes, and I say, okay, let's see you beat the next guy. And after a few minutes of this, the woman who delivers the hospital meals comes in the room, and she puts the dinner down on a table that's on wheels and wheels it right up to his chest, nice and snug, so that it actually makes him have to pause his video game. And he just looked at the woman with a smile, and he thanked her very sincerely, and you could see her light up. And she smiled as she left the room. Now, the moment that door closed, he took the table, he pushed it out of the way. He had absolutely no interest in the food.
He wasn't even going to eat it.
He wasn't even going to eat it. He was totally full. And he went right back to playing his video game. Now, this seems pretty subtle, right? But to me, this was just so powerful. I consider myself a pretty kind and patient person. And I know exactly what I would have done if I were Daniel. I would have said, oh, thanks, but could you just leave the food over there? I'm in the middle of a game.
Yeah. I'm not hungry or whatever.
Exactly. But Daniel didn't do that. Despite receiving the absolute worst news that you could ever receive in your life, he was so sensitive to that woman's feelings that he allowed her to do her job, and he thanked her for it. Despite the fact that he had no interest in the food and it disrupted his game, because as he later told me when I went to visit him and his family up in Georgia, I said, why did you do that? He said, well, it's simple. I knew it would make her feel good.
Oh.
So he reminded me that that's what great leadership is all about, is doing what we can to make the people around us happy, right?
Powerful. Powerful story. Powerful. Great book, Serve to be Great. There's so many stories like that in here and examples of how leaders of all kinds of organizations can make a difference and that everyone's a leader. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Skip.